All right, hello everybody. We're now going to try out a technique that has worked actually, and I want to show it to you. So we're using QGIS and we're using Blender. And in QGIS, we have a map that we've made of the different points in Morocco where the High Atlas Foundation works. So we want to get this terrain into Blender so we can see it in 3D, because we could go into here, and you could do it using this wonderful plugin, but then you can't do that much with it. Like, I can't make a car drive or look at make a simulation with this. So I think QGIS to 3GS exporter is great, but and you can do little movies with it, but I'd rather bring this into Blender. And in order to bring it into Blender, and my son is watching Wreck-It Ralph, so it's not a war going on behind me. To do that, if I was going to look at this entire area where the High Atlas Foundation is doing their work and where we've got all this data from the different places where they work, all I'd have to do is first get a plugin called SRTM Downloader. And you will see when you go to Manage and Install Plugins that if you go to All and you type in SRTM, then SRTM Downloader comes up, and then you can download that plugin. So I have mine, and it's checked, which means that it's available to me. And let me get rid of these because this is what I brought in, but let me delete so you can see how I bring it in. So I'm going to remove that layer, and I'm going to remove this layer. All right, and I'm going to bring it in again. So I'm looking at the map. I've got this map extent. You go up to Plugins, and you go to SRTM Downloader, and that is the Shuttle Radar Topography Mission. And I'm going to say Set Canvas Extent, so that's how much I've created on this map, west, north, east, and south. And then load images to QGIS, and I say download. And it's going to ask for your login to earthdata.nasa, so I've made an account. So then it pulls that information, and it's pulling 2 tiles, it looks like, to cover this area. So it's very clever, and you don't have to go to the USGS website or anything like that, because it already goes to NASA for this image. And then it adds that raster to it. As you can see, it actually added 2, well, actually it's just like 1 raster. It covers the whole thing. So that's nice. It made it into 1 single raster. And having that, we can then come into this area, and let me turn it off for a second so I can go into just the area that I want. So this shapefile that I made of this triangle is where High Atlas Foundation's office is, and then all the different villages that they work with. And so when I turn this on, it shows that that is the digital elevation map that covers that. So the first thing I'm going to do, since I have the digital elevation map and I have this underlying map, is I'm going to turn off my polygon feature because I don't need to export that necessarily. And I'm going to export from here, File, Export, Map to Image. And I'm going to use the canvas extent, and then I'm going to do Save. And for Blender, it doesn't really matter, but we'll do it as a geotagged TIFF format. You have all these different formats. We're going to do it as a Blender geotagged TIFF format. And I'll call this, oh, I don't want PBM. Let's do this again, TIFF format, and call it project, or HAF projects extent. I'll use that so I know what I'm doing there. And drop that in. And then I'm going to turn on the DEM and do the same thing and say export map to image, same map canvas extent, say save, and say HAF projects extent, and that'll be DEM. And I'll save that. Now, the other thing that I like to do, just to make sure things work out, is I also make a lower resolution export of this as a PNG. So it'll be extent DEM, but I'm going to change this format to PNG. And it says a TIFF already exists. So I'll say DEM ping, ping.ping, just so I don't confuse it. And then I'll do the same thing for this, because memory is always at a premium. So export map to image, and I will say map extent, and say save, and then I will call this HAF project extent, and instead of a TIFF, I'm going to say ping.ping. Now I have these images. So let me come into Blender, and I'll remove the cube, got a blank file, and the first thing I do is I'm using Blender GIS. So with that plugin, I'm going to go to to import and bring in that geo-referenced raster. And I guess I could do the ping. I didn't think about that. Let's see if I use the extent ping as the geo raster. There we go. Now I got that. And then I can also bring in my georeferenced raster and bring in the DEM ping, and you see it overlays. So great, I've got those in here. Now you would think, let me close this out. Sorry, you would think that I could just do my elevations by using a displacement on this map. And that's what I thought. I spent a lot of the morning trying to figure out why it wasn't working. And I don't really know why it's not working, but you should be able to technically go in as you do and go to edit mode and then select everything and then do your subdivide 8 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, if your computer can handle it. And then having subdivided it, you are then supposed to be able to, say it's subdivided, you're supposed to then be able to add a modifier, go to displace, and then choose a new displacement, texture, name that texture HAF project extent DEM, and then you've got to go to texture and open that texture, which we brought into, there it is, the PENG. It's a lot smaller. Look at it, it's 476 kilobytes as opposed to 1.3 megabytes. So if this is okay for you, you bring that in, and then when we go to displace, you're supposed to see displacement happen, but nothing happens. Yay, all right, so obviously a big problem here. So what to do? Well, here is what I've discovered you do after much trial and error. We're not going to use this wonderful image that georeferenced image we brought in because there's something wrong with that data. So what we do is we add a mesh plane, and that plane is going to be super tiny, as you can see. Oh, so tiny. And we're going to scale it up. And scale it up, or you just go in here and you scale it up all the way. So I find it easier. I mean, I guess we could try to make it bigger here, 100 by 100 by 100. Well, there's no z value actually at this point, so that should be 0. But ultimately, we want it to be as big as this. So you can keep stretching it and stretching it and stretching it until you get, and then scale it in Y, and then scale it in X. And then you have a new plane, which, as you can see if I move it, that's the new plane, right? And we want to take that plane. Now I can turn off that. So that's the plane that we have. And once again, you need to go to Edit, and you need to subdivide. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 usually is before the machine crash. I can try 9. The more you subdivide, the better your resolution gets, as you can can see, but it's kind of weird. All right, so we got that, and then we can go and we can go into object mode, add the modifier, put in a displacement modifier, and at this point, we can take that DEM as our extent, and there you go. You can see it starts to work. So now we're getting some displacement that's looking more like what we want for that area. That's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Z-axis, this only goes up to 100, and the mid-level only goes up so far. So this is a pretty big map, and so it's not the best way to do this, but at least it's coming in. And then when we go to add a texture to this, when we add the image from base color and then open up the HAF project extension, so you see that we now have that in there. But it's not absolutely perfect. And sometimes that's because of the size. And I'm not like really super pleased by what I've gotten here. I wonder if I add this DEM and I apply it, and then I add another displacement, what 2 times displacement will do. Ha! Really crazy, isn't it? So that's like bizarre. So adding a displacement on the displacement ain't not good. All right. So while that doesn't look terrific, let's show what happens when you use a much smaller map, because that one is clearly too big for the memory. So I'll go back to QGIS and I'll say, well, I really just want to jump in on this section here. And this is always what you're going to have to end up doing, is doing isolated sections. So this part of the map here, we can send out. And again, for the project, go to export. Oh, you know what I didn't do before I do that? Let me just see what happens if I use the TIFF. I think that would be cool before I go and do that. So if I go back to bringing in the HADEM project extent TIFF there, and then if I add another one, which would be the HAM project extent TIFF in there, and if I now go back in, this is a good review, add a mesh, put a plane in. What are the extents of this, by the way? X. So I'm going to copy this. It's not letting me copy it. There we go. No, it doesn't let me copy it. If I do Control C, I'm not sure. So I got to go to my plane and copy that. There we go. Okay, do that. Now go back to my project extent and copy that. Control C, go back into my plane and paste that in. All right. So now I have a plane that is the same size exactly. I didn't have to stretch it at all. And then I can go in and go to edit mode and subdivide 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have this, and I can now go to add a modifier and make it displacement and bring in for the displacement a new texture, which I'll call HAF project extents DEM TIFF. So I know that that's what I'm working with, and then come in here and bring in that TIFF, which is projects extent DEM as a TIFF file, which is much higher resolution. And then when I go into here and I start to texture it, now it doesn't do much better. It brings it in, but not very high. And once again, I think that's because of the see, that's not, doesn't matter whether it's a ping or a TIFF, it's not changing that too much. And I do think that's because we're dealing with such a large extent. So let's go back to QGIS. Having verified that the TIFF and the ping don't seem to make a difference, let's then take the export map to image. We'll use the canvas extent, and we will save this as HAF. I'll just call it area 1 and meter, so I remember which one of those it is. I will do a ping for this. Go ahead and turn this on and export map to image, map extent, save HAF area and meter dem. All right, now let me add those in, import HAF and meter ping. Now let me add a mesh plane. Let's go to this and figure out what the extent is. 9685, 7127. It's a lot smaller. So 9865, 9865, and then 7127, 7127. And it's in the wrong location, so I'm going to move it up. All right, so now I will subdivide. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I will go into the modifier, put a displacement in, pick a displacement, which would be the new, this is HAF and meter EM, and go to texture and open up the HAF and meter dem. And now okay, that is very strange. We ain't seeing nothing here. Okay, this is really bothering me because it was working earlier today, and now it's not. And I don't understand it. So I'm going to quit Blender, and I'm going to restart Blender, because it might be a cache issue. Now, I'm not sure. If it's a cache issue, then it's a pain, but let's see. So let's try again by putting in the object, and I will use just the and meter ping, and then I will create a mesh plane. I'm going to get the extent of this, which is here, and then go to my plane and paste that in, and then I'll go to here again and copy that and paste that in. Now I have my plane. I can turn off this. I can go to edit mode, subdivide 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Go back to object mode, come into displace, add the displacement modifier. No. And then the HAF and meter, and then bring in the texture from HAF and meter dem, which looks like that. And then nothing. It is coming in, but it's coming in very weakly. Very, very weakly.
Daddy.
Yeah, and I
don't like rock anymore.
All right, so a little pause, and I figured something out here. So it looks like it isn't really giving much. And that's frustrating. You think, okay, I did the mid-levels, and I did, I tried to get this really to be pronounced, and it doesn't seem to be working. But it turns out that you need to go to Scale in Z, and then scale it up. That's what I was missing in there. So now, although we can't verify that this is exactly what the reality is, let me try 1. 1 is not pronounced enough. You can do some exaggerations that way. And then when you go to material and you add the new material that is a image texture, and then find our and meter area and open it up, then you can see, yeah, those are the villages relative to the height there, and see what the heights are. So while this isn't a perfect technique, it certainly does work. And I think moving this up so that it's out of this grid, you can see it better, and you can adjust as necessary. Now the pixelation is because of the number of times we were able to subdivide. So what people do then is they right-click and they go shade smooth and shade smooth, and that gets rid of some of that pixelation, not all of it. You can keep doing it and seeing how smooth it can get, and then you have the ability to make things more or less pronounced. So I think it'd be worth now trying the bigger map and seeing how that works. I'm going to delete that, and I'll go back to GIS and import the project extent, which was so big. There it is. And then again, I'm going to add a plane. So add mesh plane. Right click on this to get the dimensions. There's that. And go to the plane and pop that in. And then go to the next part and grab that. Copy it. Go back in. And go to that. Now we have that plane. It didn't come in exactly on top, so I'm going to move it. All right, and then once again, I can turn off this, and I can go to edit mode and subdivide once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'll try. And then I will go to I can add the material right now. So that material is image texture, HAF projects, project extent. So we have that now. And because we have made it a fine mesh, now when we go to the displacement modifier, search to displace, and then make a, we don't want the and meter one, we want to create a new one, new texture, which we'll call HAF projects extent. and then go to textures and define what that extent is going to be, which is going to be the HAF project extent DEM that we had. And there it comes in. And now that we have it, we'll go back up to here and try to make those mountains grow. And you see they did grow a little bit, especially you can tell if you look in here. It does have some relief, but isn't a lot. So we go to the Z scale, and then we start seeing mountain displacement for the entire region. And of course, it would be nice if it was shade smoothed a couple times. And looks like our points are splayed out in there, which is kind of interesting. But there we go. So we have a map that really gives you the sense of how the mountain chain is distributed among the villages. So that's pretty cool. But it took a while to figure out all those things. And this is my typical blunder through Blender. I try to do new techniques every day and figure them out and record my blunderings so that I can follow my steps when I make a mistake. And then when I redo it, I can describe it more confidently. But this seems to be working. Again, I can't ground truth what this is. This is all about exaggeration and caricature. I suppose if you put this down to just 1, that would be technically probably correct, but it doesn't show up well. And a lot of mapping is just making it show up well so that people can see. And that's what caricature is. It's exaggerating certain features at the neglect of others so that you can make a point. So that's pretty cool. But this gives you more flexibility than it would when you use QGIS with the same elevation, and you go to the QGIS to 3D Explorer, and you can see there, yes, you do have the ability to see stuff that way too, which is cool, QGIS. All right, so that's it for right now.